Comedians on retainer. Ted the Terrible. That's me. And here's the agenda. This is going to be very messy. I didn't plan this very well. But we're here. Okay. Perhaps, dear viewer, you are tired of your job. Perhaps you harbour malice for your manager. After all, you might work in a cubicle or on a factory line. Maybe your work is solely online, thus making the establishment of your relationships between co-workers strenuous, if not nigh on impossible. Perhaps the only reason you work is to go home. You might think this is normal, and unfortunately, it is. But you and I both know that we were not given life by the grace of God to steep ourselves in banality. G.K. Chesterton said it best. Angels can fly because they can take themselves lightly, and I suppose, as the Americans would say, this is my thesis statement, my central idea, right? But I go back on myself. Perhaps you only work to go home, but you and I know that work does not have to be menial. We all have labours of love, work that we really do enjoy, and you can call them hobbies, but at the end of the day, they are entertainments that don't involve passivity. One example, a maker of model planes works for his end goal, yet a binge watcher sits in stark contrast and waits for his actors to reach an end goal for him. And that's not to disparage any TV or movie watching. I think there is a time and a place for it. I mean, to go against binge watching specifically. But I shan't belabor the point. The reason I wanted to put this small project together is because I would like to propose the institution of comedians on retainer, a deliberate parallel with the court jesters of a bygone era. I put this idea forward, which you and I know is not an entirely serious one, not in its proposal, nor literally, with two benefits in mind, in reference to one of a jester's many and varied roles, that being making fun of the king. For one, a jester, or today, a comedian's critique of the employer would humble him, and a jester's critiques would air criticisms from employees that would otherwise go unspoken by his disgruntled employees. I'm Ted the Terrible, and here is my case for comedians on retainer or modern-day jesters. We'll start with a brief history of court jesters. So, jesters are very fun, but I'm going to suck all the joy out of it by going through some etymology of the word jester. So, it starts with the Latin gesta, which means to carry, behave, act, or perform, which then goes into the French geste or geste. I don't really know how to pronounce it. The Old French. It's Old French. I've only typed French, but it is from the Old French, not the modern French. And then we have in the mid 14th century the French gestor, which sounds like jester. And the word jester didn't really, or jest didn't enter the English language until the 1520s. Although there was the Middle English geston, which meant a reciter of a tale. But it wouldn't be accurate to say that we didn't have some kind of a jester type character. The words buffoon existed for one. And so here's a bit of history. We will talk about the history of European jesters specifically, though it should not be thought that the history of jestership is solely a European one. Jesters have existed all across the world at various points in time. But I'm European, and that's where I decided to direct my attention. If you would like to research jesters from other parts of the world, these resources certainly exist. But one reason is because I'm English, I'm European. It's my neck of the woods, if you will. But also researching jesters on a global scale, it would take a lot of time, and I'm not just someone who makes videos about jesters. I have other things to do. Anyways, let's talk about the history of jesters. The earliest recognized predecessors of jesters are the comic actors of Rome. His was not the trade of jestering in a formal sense, but the role required some outspokenness towards authority, as indicated by periodical purges across the Roman Empire. Such purges forced comic actors to spread across the continent, perhaps laying the foundation for medieval jesters. And what I mean by that is, spreading across the continent was they dispersed and became sort of travelling comics, if you will, very similar to some jesters. A lot of jesters were kind of on retainer. They were employed by nobles and kings and so on and so forth. But others were, travelling. They were travelling artisans, if you will. And one thing I found very interesting, a surprising example of social mobility under feudalism, although obviously the experience of jesters shouldn't be seen as representative for the experience of most people, especially most peasants. But medieval jesters could come from any background after being scouted by a passing nobleman. I mean, this is very similar to, comics today who do the rounds. They go to the pubs and the sort of comedy club circuit and get scouted, right, by agents and so on, One account I found detailing the recruitment of one of Elizabeth I's jesters tells us that he was found by a servant of the Earl of Leicester while tending to pigs. And we've got a quote here: "Jesters were not a rare find, being in every court worth its salt in medieval and Renaissance Europe." So it's not this very rare thing. You come across one jester in every 20 courts. No, they were populous. I mean, not going to say every 1 in 10 peasants was a jester. No, I mean, but they were not this kind of. It was not uncommon. I'll put it this way. And I think we'll now be talking about the roles of fools. That's a fun one. The role of fools. I'll start with the ones that really aren't as relevant to my discussion, and then we'll go to the one that is centrally relevant to my discussion here, or this discussion. It's not. I don't own the discussion, although I kind of do, because I'm making the video, and I'll only get criticism after the video comes out, and so I own the discussion in the sense that I don't get any criticism while I'm making my points. Besides the point, I digress. So, let's talk about what jesters did in the golden age of jesting. Aside from the actual jestering, they would act as counselors and confidants to their masters. Masters that was the term at the time. One famous English jester, Will Somers, Henry VIII's most famous jester, is said to have been the only person to make the king smile when he was in pain from an ulcerated leg. Here's an interesting one I did not know until researching this. The jester also found a job in mocking enemies before battles and raising the spirits of his allies. Not only this, but jesters also function as messengers during battle. So your jester would send messages of surrender or terms for releasing hostages. This was something I read doing research. But funny enough, it's not really funny if you treat the jesters as human, but if you treat them as little gooblers who go around and make people laugh by, making fun of people and whatnot, and doing certain bodily sounds, then it's funny to note that jesters often would not come back in one piece, right? They would go to the enemy camp, and sometimes, no, I said often, sometimes, the jester would give the message to the opposing side in a battle, and this has nothing to do with discussion. I just think it's a really interesting fact. The jester would not come back alive, and the response to certain messages would come in the medium of at least some or all of a jester's body being flung from a trebuchet. I say some because sometimes it would be the severed head of a jester. Other times it would just be the jester bound and flung from a trebuchet live to fall onto the battlefield at a high speed of knots. But this is all, it has nothing to do with the discussion. I just thought it was very interesting, something I didn't know. I don't think a lot of people, I would venture to guess that a lot of people didn't know that. But it's besides the point. I digress. What has the most relevance to a jester's role in this discussion? Sorry, what has most relevance to this discussion is obviously the jester's role as a comedian. His role in court was to make his masters and guests laugh and keep them in good spirits. He could do so in any ways possible, most ways possible. I mean, there were some restrictions in the English courts on making fun of the church or religion specifically, although there was no restriction on making fun of clergymen who were falling behind or being sort of heterodox. Anyway, most ways, I should have said most ways. But infamously, the most infamous thing is the jester's privilege. I think most people who know about jesters will know about jester's privilege, which here's a quote lifted straight from Wikipedia: "The ability and right of a jester to talk and mock freely without being punished." Now, obviously, I just said there were some restrictions in English courts on mocking the church, and okay, I don't know about the rules anywhere else in the world, but this is the thing in England. So there were like a couple of restrictions, but they could make fun of the king. This is a famous thing. It's like a quite an infamous quote. I'll paraphrase. It's like, you need a jester to make fun of the king or whatever, right? Because power corrupts, and so you need someone to regulate that. And that is the point I will be getting to very soon. It was not uncommon for a jester to ridicule his master, and if you were a jester at the time, your master might well have also been your king. And herein, see, I said I was about to make this point, lies our connection to the modern world of work. I'm sure you have heard enough about jesters, or the history of jesters, and if you haven't, by all means, do your own research. They're a fascinating group, and there is not like reams and reams of information out there, especially with public access. I had some difficulty, even with a university email address, to get to some of the stuff I wanted to read. But I found enough. I mean, I found other things. I mean, just the Wikipedia page has many links on it, which is where I found a lot of my resources. Well, in fact, most of them, except like one. I didn't even use that many resources. This has taken me only a few hours to put together. I digress. I'm very tired, but I digress. But I think for the purposes of my argument, I've gone into unnecessary detail because I've talked about a jester's role in battle and as confidants to a king, which has nothing to do with my argument whatsoever. I just thought it was fascinating, and I think I would be doing a disservice to any discussion on jesters if I didn't highlight some of the ways that jesters found themselves working, aside from the typical one that everyone knows. But now we are going on to section 2, I think. In the workplace. It's seamless. It's really seamless. I'm perhaps I will become an epic lecturer. I probably won't. I don't really want to. In the workplace. Okay, this is the part where I've got like no references because this is all in my head. In theory, what would a modern jester look like? Well, I suppose it would be similar to a court jester. It would function similarly. Oh my goodness, my Siri is going up. My apologies, this is very unprofessional. Let me start that again. Well, a modern jester would be very similar to a medieval or Renaissance court jester. He would function similarly, but critiquing an employer, not a master of a house or a king. Something akin to like a comedian on retainer, not unlike how large businesses keep lawyers on retainer. Obviously, this would be a hardly justifiable salary to pay, so it might actually look something like a hired entertainer. He would function solely to make light of the employer. Such aforementioned mockery would benefit a workplace in two ways, briefly visited in the introduction. First, The mockery of a jester would humble any manager or business owner who might be too big for his boots, and might provide some catharsis, some schadenfreude to his long-suffering employees. Second, the jester in his sincere ridicule, and you'd hope it would be sincere ridicule, and not just kind of very face value, skin-deep ridicule, aha, you're a manager and you look ugly. No, it would be sincere and even constructive ridicule, if there is such a thing. It could air grievances, which, if presented by employees, might hold their jobs in contempt. You don't want to insult your boss. I think, you can do it indirect. You can do it, without thinking, subconsciously. Well, not subconsciously, but unintentionally. But if you like your job and you want to keep it, you don't really cuss out your boss, your manager. Anyway, because you fear for your job position. If you just go out and cuss your manager out, then he might fire you for being insubordinate, which I suppose isn't unreasonable in some circumstances, but still quite unfair. Anyway, having a jester, a specific person, to present these criticisms in a funny way, it's a legitimate, a valid way to present these criticisms. I mean, you have like suggestion boxes, but has any manager or business owner ever checked one? I doubt it. Well, maybe some, but I think we all know that the suggestion box is a farce. In this scenario, in this circumstance, the manager still remains a manager, and the employee still remains an employee, but their relationship changes to one based not on a presumption of power, but based on respect. And you might be thinking, but you're employing the jester to ridicule a manager. Where's the respect in that? Well, I'll tell you. It's found because if you're an employee, you might well be. Your manager, you don't like him very much. His attitude, he's too big for his boots, right? And you see he employs a jester or a comedian to make fun of him, permanently. Maybe if it's a huge corporation, you have someone on dock, right? Like a lawyer, as I just mentioned. And he hires, you'd respect him because he's paying someone to make fun of him, make light of himself for your benefit. I would respect that manager, that business owner. I would respect him or her. It's 2025. Ted, get a grip. I'm sorry to all the empowered female business owners. You also can hire a comedian to make fun of you if you so please. So that's the thing, and I'm now just thinking, I didn't write this in my little script or put it on my PowerPoint, but I'm thinking as well, I'm reminded of the episode of The American Office. I don't know if it's in the UK Office. I didn't really like it that much, but I'm going on a tangent. But maybe many of you are familiar with the episode of The Office, which ashamedly I did binge watch, and I will admit it. I don't want to get any mystery around this. I did in the past. I find it entertaining, but I'm past it now. But anyway, I remember the episode where Michael Scott, the manager of the office of Dunder Mifflin Paper Company in Scranton, Pennsylvania, he organizes a roast, and this might be something which is much more amicable and much more feasible, I think. It's having an office roast, where you make fun of the manager. Of course, it doesn't end well because Mr. Scott is very insecure and he storms off. But then he does come back. He has a redemption and he makes fun of the employees. Boom roasted, that famous scene. But this kind of scenario, with like the roast of your manager, right? This seems like a much more feasible and actually more inclusive of the employees. It seems much more feasible, much more inclusive of the employees because it provides a platform for them to directly say things rather than rely on the medium of a jester. But it's just another thing that popped into my head, and I would like to make reference to one fella I found. This man I found researching this in sheer coincidence. I kid you not. You are not being kid. You are not being made a joke of. And in this scenario, you cannot look me in the eyes. Well, first of all, no webcam, right? Second of all, you cannot look me in the eyes and say, Ted, don't piss on my head and tell me it's raining. This is a lie. No, I'm not kidding you. I'm not pissing on your head and telling you it's raining. I thought of this idea, and then I'm researching it, and I found this guy who's already doing it. I'm really, really happy to see this, because now I know it's not just a novel idea. It's not just this thing I thought in my head that's a bit silly. This guy's actually doing it. He's in the Netherlands. His name is, I'm not going to try and pronounce it properly, Juri Hoedemakers. I hope I did that justice, but I can barely speak English. But besides the point, right? He styles himself as a modern court jester, doing much of what I described as a comedian on retainer might do. In fact, I believe he has finished, or I couldn't find it, whether he's still doing his PhD or whether he has finished his PhD, but his thesis at the Rotterdam School of Management was based on the added value of jesters in modern organizations through creating a safe workspace to prevent cases of abuse of power and cultures of fear in the workplace. Now, this was exactly what I was thinking of before I researched this. I researched anything about jesters, which I think it's very. I think in this case it seems intuitive, because I thought of it intuitively, rationally, and then I do my research, and I see that someone's already thought of it. Now, I'm not rueing or lamenting that someone thought of it before me. I'm actually joyed that someone thought of it before me, because it means that I'm not being completely irrational. I mean, maybe I'm making flawed points, and that's why comments exist on YouTube. And I'd love to have some constructive criticism. Maybe you would think, okay, it's too expensive. Why would anyone justify, or how could anyone justify paying a comedian to act as a jester, right? But to my retort, preemptive retort, would be, well, this guy Juri Hoedemakers is doing it right now, and he's still doing it, right? He's actively doing this, so there must be some market for it. But anyway, here's just one example, and so I'd like to get to my conclusion. Conclusion. Final thoughts. So I hope you agree with me that jesters have a rich history that spans the globe. And of course, I didn't get into. I said I would do European jesters. I got very tired. It's like 5 a.m. now, as I'm recording this right now, and it's 4:58. If you must know, and I only really talked about English jesters, like what was his name? I've already forgotten it. Something Sommer. Give me a minute, sorry. Well, I talked about one of Elizabeth I's jesters, and I talked about Will Sommers, that's the one. Both English jesters, English court jesters to Queen Elizabeth I, one of my favourites of all time, by the way, the GOAT. One of the GOATs of English monarchy, but that's a whole nother thing. Maybe I would do a little very, very, very unacademic biography of old Lizzie One. But we'll see on that one. The jury's out on whether I will make that. And the other one was Will Sommers, the most prominent jester of the King Henry VIII. But anyway, you go online and you'll see that jesters are not just a European thing, they span the globe. And this was something I wasn't aware of until I started researching this. I mean, go on the Wikipedia page for jesters. It's just Wikipedia, just jesters. The title is just jesters. Jesters on its own. And you can see, I saw one jester from Indonesia, for example. And this wasn't like a Western-styled jester, not wearing the silly hat with the bells on it, right? Anyway, right. I do regret not having the time nor energy to showcase the rich global history of jesters, of jesting. And I also hope that you now share my somewhat unserious opinion. Well, it's kind of serious. I mean, the guy's doing it. Juri Hoedemakers is doing it. So I've grown in seriousness. I thought this was kind of a silly idea, and then I research it and I find, hang on, there's actually something to this. But it's also somewhat unserious. I mean, if I were a business owner, I don't know if I would employ a comedian to make fun of me. Not out of humility, more. Well, I guess you could say I'm not very humble. I'll take it. Maybe I'm not very humble. But I hope you now share my opinion that jesters have a contemporary relevance and usefulness in the modern business world. You know, we're not in this feudal society anymore. Although, I mean, you might be able to tell I'm English. Maybe. And we still have a constitutional monarchy. But to my knowledge, I don't believe that King Charles III has any court jesters. I don't actually think he has a court. That's kind of a thing of the past. And I'd like to leave a question with you. And please, if you feel so inclined, answer in the comments. I will read them. I will read them because I really enjoyed what little research I did do on this topic. Is the jester type, the archetype, the jester, the fool, inevitable in workplaces? And here's what I mean by this. Whether ridicule is performed through the medium of a jester or not, it must exist in workplaces with managers whose ego is too big for their boots. So I suppose my real question is, does ridicule behind a manager's back constitute jesting in the sense of the jesting history, which I've briefly gone over? I look forward to your thoughts on this. Yes, your thoughts. No one else's, just yours. I guess it's kind of jesting, but here's what I think about it. It's not. You don't become the jester, because the whole point, I think, of the jester, the pinnacle, the apex of jesting is the jester's privilege. That being that you're able to make fun of the big boss in charge. And if you're doing it behind a manager's back, then you're not taking part in the fundamental, what I would argue is the fundamental characteristic of a jester. But anyway, I think, yes, thank you for sticking along. And if you enjoyed this video by some miracle, please show your support through subscribing and liking the video. As if it makes any difference, because I'm not making money off of this, am I? It's my first video, right? But I'd appreciate it if I see the little like thing and it says more than one. I mean, I'll be overjoyed. I'll be overjoyed. I will be, because I'm a simple man. I make video about jester, But again, I react positively to support, as do most people. I'm not unique in this, but I'm not going to sit around and cry if I don't get any support. I'm doing this because I enjoy it. But all this to say, like and subscribe, please. I've been TedTheTerrible on Modern Day Jesters, or what I've called them, comedians on retainer. And that, I believe, is that. Now, have a good morning, evening, night, noon, and God bless you also. I don't know what else to say. I never thought, how will I end this? I never thought about that, but because I kind of don't want it to end. I love discussing these things. I wish I could have done more research in the time I allotted myself, but I didn't. Mostly just time constraints. I've got a train to catch in a few hours, and I'm still yet to finish packing, and I've yet to sleep. Also, I'm probably not going to do that until tonight. But you don't need to know this. It's just, the thing is, I love the discussion. So I guess the way I'll end it is by not ending it through replying to comments, if anyone comments, if anyone even sees this video. But, at the end of the day, jesters are these silly fellas, and that's what makes them, I think, so useful, because it adds a bit of whimsy. Even if you're not coming from a critical perspective of a manager, the critical perspective of an employee, it still is this kind of whimsy, and also they have the funny costumes, and it's funny. Shoot me, man. Actually, don't shoot me. I like being alive. How, if you shot me, could I continue making videos of such a high caliber as this. Now, as I said, hope you have a good morning, or if it's not the morning, have a good noon, or afternoon, or evening, or night. I don't know, bloody make sure you drink some water. Tell the people you love that you love them. Godspeed. There you go, that's how I'm going to end it. Godspeed, young man or woman, or old man or old... You know what, just Godspeed.